Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. Today we have a very good problem today, right? It's called merge in between linked lists, right? So let's see what it's all about, right? So it says we're given two linked lists, right? List one and list two of sizes n and m respectively, right? So remove list one's node from the eighth node to the bth node and put list two in their place, right? Okay, pretty simple thing, right? So we need to remove the eighth node and the bth node and just put list two in between, right? Instead, right, in their place. So the blue edges and nodes are in the following figure indicate the results, right? So we see we got a simple list. This one, list two, right? And we need to remove the eighth node and the bth node, right? All the nodes in between, right? So from the eighth node to the bth node, right? We'll remove all those nodes, right? And then put the list two in between them, right? So that's kind of what they're saying, okay? Pretty interesting, right? So let's further solidify the ask by going through a very good example, right? So this example is given to us, right? We need to remove the node at index 3 and remove the node all the way up to the nodes at index 4, guys, right? So that's going. So this is a first node, zeroth node, first nodes at the index 1, index 2, index 3, right? We remove all those different nodes, right? Remove that node. And they would also remove the fourth one, right? So we remove all this node that they said to remove. And that's how we, instead of this node now, right? So the node at index 0, 1, 2, 2 points to the head of the second list, right? That's how we simulate putting it, right? We put it. So now instead of pointing to those nodes, right, we remove the link, we point to those nodes. And now the tail of this node, of this linked list, points to the remainder nodes, right, that are left in the original list, right? Right, after removing those nodes, right? So that's kind of what this is. Okay, so you remove nodes 3 and 4, put the entire list 2 in their place, right? Right, pretty simple. I think this one is even a better example to go through, right? So we can see that we need to remove all the nodes from and starting from index 2 and ending at the index 5, right? Okay, so see 0, 1, and 2. So we remove all those nodes, right? All the way up to the 5th, right? Okay. Index 5, and then we move all those different nodes, right? And then we're left, we just put those nodes in their place, guys, right? It's as simple as that, right? So that's kind of what that is. So we understand the ask, right? So let's now come up with the algorithm that we need to come up with, guys, right? It's kind of important, right? So how do we solve it and what do we need to do, guys, right? So let's think about straightforward, guys, right? And I think straightforward might work for this particular problem, right? So I'm thinking is to maybe we do a loop, guys, where we could find, right? So we need to remove those nodes, right? We don't care about those nodes. It seems like, right? We don't care about them. So how do we do that, right? We could maybe find, right? I'm thinking is find the node before the where we need, starting from the starting point where we need to start removing nodes, right? Find that node before this node, right? So that's going to give me a lot of flexibility now, right? So I have reference to the node before the nodes, before the starting point of the nodes that I need to remove, right? Okay. Having reference to that now, I can just not point to this anymore, right? And just point to the head of the list 2, right? Okay. So now we're getting somewhere, right? So we could just not point to this one, right? So I have access to that node. I point to the head of this node instead, right? Okay. But how do I get the tail to point to the other nodes, right? That should not be removed, right? How do I do that? Okay, so we solve one aspect, right? But how do we solve this one? So what I'm thinking is we can loop through this second list, right? We loop through it, right? And then we get the tail of that list. And then how do we know where to point it, guys, right? So there's a little bit of things that we need to do before that. I'm thinking we need to maybe find the last node that needs to be removed, right? In that range, right? So I find that endpoint, right? And that node that's going to be removed, right? So now I have access. So that's going to help me have access to the next node that's not part of that range, guys, right? So because I have access to that node now, right? That's not part of that range. I could easily just, since I have the tail of this list too, right? I could just point it to whichever node this guy's pointing to, right? Which is the endpoint of the range of nodes that needs to be removed, guys, right? I could easily point to it, guys, right? So that's kind of what the algorithm is going to be pretty much, right? We going to do a loop, right? Find the node before the nodes that need to be removed, right? Because we need to find before, because once we go forward, right, we can't go back, right? So that's kind of what it is. That's what we need to have access to the node before it, right? Instead, and just point it to remove reference to that node and then point it to this one, right? All right, and then now this connection won't exist anymore, right? So 6 won't be part of this list anymore, right? It will be just have all the nodes and all the nodes that comes after it, right? Okay, and that's why we're also going to need the endpoint, guys, right? Of that range, right? To be able to have access to the node that's not part of the range that needs to be removed, right? So because the last node of the range is going to have access to that node, right? That's why it's important to capture that node as well, right? And then we could just point it once we find the tail of the list two, right? We could just point it to whichever node this guy was pointing to, right? So that's kind of what it is, right? So hopefully it kind of made sense, guys, right? So it's two things I need to get into account. It's find a node before this node, so we could point to the head of list two, right? And then find a tail, then we point to whichever node that the end boundary is pointing at, right? So that's kind of the simple algorithm, right? So let's quickly get into the code. All right, so what we're gonna do, we're gonna have very descriptive variables, guys, right? So node before the eighth node, right? Okay, is going to be, so originally we're gonna have null for them, right? And then also we're gonna need to capture this node, right? The beef node, right? So those are going to be important. So we could do the connection accordingly, guys, right? And then what I'm going to do is so we're going to need a variable to just start listing, right? To iterate through the linked list, right? So while we're doing that, we're going to capture that, right? So we're going to do I is less than 0, I is less than there could be, right? Because we need that. Okay. I plus plus. Okay, so we're gonna loop through, find all those nodes, guys, right? Okay, so what we're gonna do now, what's next is to, if we encounter a minus one node, right? So if I is equal to the a minus one node, right? So that means that's the node that's before the eighth node, right? That we want, right? Remember I told you guys why we need that, right? So we can remove reference that node to the eighth node, right? And then point to the head of the list two instead, right? Because we're trying to, remember, we're trying to put the list two instead of those nodes, the range of nodes that needs to remove, right? So that's kind of what I'm doing here, guys, right? Hopefully it makes sense. So node is equal to whichever occurs at right now, right? And then we're also going to have, if I is equal to beef node, then we're going to capture the beef node right there, guys, right? As simple as that. Okay. And then until we do, we're going to do curs, go to cur that next. Okay. So now that we have those pieces of information, guys, sorry, let me zoom in real quick, just trying to get more space. So what needs to be done next? So we got those information here. What we're going to do next is to, now we can easily connect the node before this node, right? We could point that node to the head of the list two, right? Which is this guy, right? So we point to it straight up right here. And then what's next for us to do is to find, so we have that node as well, right? The endpoint of that range, right? So we have this if node, right? And then we have the beef node right here, right? So this guy is going to help us have access to this guy, right? That's why we save that guy right there, right? So that's kind of what I'm doing. Okay. So we do the connection, right? Point one to the head of this, right? And then now what we're going to do is to find that guy, right? So I could point to the beef node, right? That next I could point to it, right? That's kind of what I'm doing here, guys, right? So what I'm going to do is to, so now I'm going to iterate through the list two now, right? Just kind of what I'm going to do. Okay. So we're going to do a simple while loop, right? Pretty simple. So while cur that next, cur is not null, right? Cur that next is not null, right? Because I'm trying to find that last guy, right? This guy, okay? We're going to keep going. Okay, so I find that this guy will occur that next not null, right? So now I could easily just do occur that next points to the beef node, right? So it can't be just the beef node, right? It will be this guy will be pointing to this guy, right? We don't want that. We want to point to whichever node that it's pointing at, right? So that's kind of what we're going to do that next. Okay. After that, all the connections should be made and we should be able to return list one, guys, right? Could we just modify that in place, guys, right? So yeah, so what we do, we just do a loop, right? Try to find those two pieces of data points, right? The node right before the eighth node, right? Outside of the range, right? Okay. And then the beef node, right? We have that guy, so we could easily point to it, right? Okay. By whichever node it's pointing at, right? We could just stop here and then point to this guy, right? So let's press run code, see if we pass the small test case, guys.
Bruh.
Add a semicolon for no reason. It should have been there.
Bruh.
All right, I was missing. I meant to do that next here, right? Because that's what we want to do. We want to point to the node right before the eighth node, right? We want it to point to the head of the second list, right? That's why we have that next here, guys, right? So I think we should be fine now. Right? I think it looks good. Let's press submit. Awesome, guys. We're able to pass all the test cases, guys, right? If you guys found value, you guys understood the thought process and the logic, right? Let me know that in the comment section, right? So if you're new here, make sure to subscribe because we'll be doing a lot of other videos just like this one. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.